Hi guys! In this video, Coach Alan and I wanted to discuss a common theme that we see with some of our clients. Oftentimes, people come to us and feel super restricted with their food choices, and that often leads to overeating as a result of feeling so restricted. So, we wanted to address that mindset in this video by discussing the fact that there are no such thing as good or bad foods and giving yourself unconditional permission to eat so that you can find the happy middle ground between eating a diet that satisfies you physiologically and psychologically. So hopefully you find this video helpful.
Hey guys, how are you doing? It's Coach Alan here with Coach Shannon. So we are here. We will be chatting about the huge topic, and it's a passion of mine and Shannon's as well, and something that I guess Flexus has really focusing on helping clients with. And it's also why we're sort of pushing the concept of informed eating as well. So the topic is binge eating, or the binge and restrict cycle that we see often happening. So we'll be touching on 4 key points today. The first point is, what do we commonly see happening with new clients? And the second point is the negative connotation towards the word dieting and the emotional attachment to foods. And the third point is the knowledge and information you need to make the shift. And also the last point is, what do we want you guys to achieve ultimately? So I'll pass it on to you. First point, what do we commonly see happening with new clients?
Yeah, I just want to quickly distinguish between binge eating disorder and then the kind of behaviors that we're talking about here, because obviously dealing with people who are suffering from binge eating disorder is outside our scope of practice. But we can classify that according to the DSM-4 or 5, depending on which one you want to use. Binge eating disorder is classified as feeling a loss of control over eating, overeating in a short period of time, and those binge eating episodes occur at least 2 days a week for 6 months. That was the old criteria, and now they've changed it to at least 1 day a week for 3 months, because I feel like that's an extreme level. And what we see with clients is quite common for people to overeat. Like, there's a difference between binge eating disorder and then the kind of typical binge and restrict cycle, which we see with a lot of our clients. And I think that binge and restrict cycle stems from a misunderstanding around food choices, feelings of guilt for eating foods, overindulging on them because you tell yourself that you can't have them, and then that creates a vicious cycle. And I think that's different from clinical levels of binge eating episodes. I feel like that's more common in what we would address with clients rather than step. And if you're suffering from those, if that's occurring frequently enough, that you think you've got a real problem, I would search for, a psychiatrist or someone to help you with. So with our clients, we typically see a dichotomous way of thinking around foods. So looking at foods as good and bad, telling yourself that you can't have foods, and then giving in to that resistance and overindulging, and then just creating a negative spiral.
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very good point that you mentioned, like obviously, what I see often with clients is sort of, especially with a lot of new clients coming on board, is that I think a lot of them know a little bit about what we do. Obviously they, see our results with clients, and I guess the content that we put out, which is obviously flexible approach to nutrition, and obviously provide a lot of the information around dieting and stuff, and teaching people that you can utilize different food sources and you don't have to feel bad about eating. And that's one thing that I often say to my clients that who sort of have these issues, or I overate on the weekend and things like that. I just, couldn't control, couldn't sleep to die. The first thing I said that is, you shouldn't feel guilty about eating food. That's the huge, huge part, right? Yeah, you shouldn't feel bad about eating. Yeah, sure. You didn't follow the diet, or you didn't, adhere to what we were supposed to adhere to. But at the end of the day, it's eating food. We just need to work on life. And I think that's a huge, huge first step to remove that negative emotion towards, I guess, dieting. And a lot of times I see, a huge reason as to why this happens is a lot of them had like, I guess, experience with extreme diet approach, which often resulting in that, because when you're restricting yourself from eating all these foods, and then you have that, you've constantly being told you can't eat this, you can't eat that. And obviously we know that's usually the start of that cycle, like what you just mentioned, right? That's kind of like the areas that I see a lot of people happening. And I think most people can relate to that, even myself at some, I guess we can all relate to having, without being informed before we have the understanding that we do now, we see all this information from social media or a news article and things like that, it's very easy to sort of be led into believe that type of thing. So that's one of the huge area. And I guess another part is that, I found that a lot of people tend to fall back into that extreme diet approach, even if they know better, because I feel like, because obviously, with our approach to help them with fat loss or whatever the goal is, it's going to take some time, right? Because if it didn't take you 12 weeks to put all that fat back on, it's going to take longer to keep that off. And I think for a lot of people, I see more often with female clients too. I don't know if you see the same, where they want to see the weight shift. Obviously so focus on the number on the scale. So when they don't see the numbers on the scale shift, it's very easy to fall back into that approach that I used in the past, which is the rapid weight loss or the extreme diet approach, because they once saw results from that approach. So when they see they're following like, a small deficit of things like that, and utilizing variety of foods, and weight isn't moving as fast as they like. So it's like, oh, why am I, this is clearly not working. So I need to go right back to how I used to do it. But then the problem is then you just go back into, you restrict yourself, you lose a few kilos, but it's probably mostly just through glycogen and fluid anyway, like the initial drop has not actually fat loss, and then you go back into up and down. So it's like, that's the reason why you came to us in the first place, right? Because that obviously didn't last, and you couldn't sustain the result.
I actually think that physical changes, like physiological changes, can occur much quicker than psychological changes. So maybe you can change your body composition quite drastically in 12 weeks, but the psychological changes may take longer. And I think that's something that people don't realize, that if you've got negative thought patterns or bad habits, breaking those is going to take time and commitment. So we've discussed how to recognize someone who's suffered from that kind of binge and restrict cycle. If you've got someone like that who's come on board with you, what approach do you take to help address those issues?
So, and that's something that I have to learn over the years. Last few years, working with different individuals as well, is I guess I have learned that, I have to meet them in the middle. I think that's kind of what coaching is really about, is finding a balance between what they want and what they need. And it's like, changing someone's, I guess, sort of like trying to change someone's belief that's ingrained in them, right? And then explaining. And this is, I guess, a huge part of the reason why we're coming up with this informed eating concept, is because without the knowledge, and the education, it's very easy to fall back into that. And then if I don't explain to you or trying to help you understand why this is the better approach long term, then it's hard for you to buy into, like, trust in the process. And like I said, it's going to, the physiological changes can be rather quick, but when we are trying to work on improving a relationship with food and teaching them about informed eating and things like that, that itself takes a long time. And what I usually do, or now that I have started doing, is, I guess, I'll try to shift towards focusing on health, mentally and physically, and I try to slowly remove the word dieting to focusing on nutrition, training, I suppose I'll focus on exercising. Once we know those things, then we can sort of start to build into, I guess, following the diet, utilizing different foods and things like that. So obviously the approach is going to be very different from individual to individual, but I think the huge part really is finding out where they are. And like you say, if it's to the point where we can't really help them, like there's a deeper issue, then obviously we'll need to refer that to extra practitioners who can actually help them to achieve that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the underlying theme in the way that you would help to coach someone who is suffering from this is through the education, because I think that this negative mindset around food stems from a misunderstanding. So people might feel guilty after eating some chocolate because they believe that it's bad for them and is going to come with these negative health consequences, or is going to make them gain fat, when we know that's not necessarily the case, because it's not the specific food choices in isolation. It's a combination of your food choices in the context of your whole diet over time that's going to lead to changes in body composition. So I think educating people, teaching them that there are no such things as good or bad foods. There are foods that contain more nutrients than others. There are foods that are more energy dense than others. And it's up to you to kind of figure out for yourself, or with the help of a coach, how to include these foods in moderation so that you can still reach your goals and still satisfy your psychological cravings and things like that, or even going out and being able to socialize. I've worked with people who feel like eating out is putting them off track because they're out of their routine. So it's learning how to manage that, which is a part of life, so that you don't go overboard and overeat when you're eating out. I think that characteristic of loss of control, again, is helped with an increased understanding of your food choices, because you know exactly how to quantify, the amounts that you can reasonably eat. And I find that restrictive behaviors, when you tell yourself you can't have something, that's when you want it more, and that's going to be on your mind. And there's only so many times that you can kind of say no to something before you're like, right, that's it, I'm eating that, whatever the thing is. And knowing that you can have it and that it's a choice. There's a phrase that you might come across, which is unconditional permission to eat, which is something we all have. Because if you're deciding that you want to lose fat, that is your choice. You can eat any foods. Whether or not you should, or whether or not you really want to, comes down to you. Like, you have the choice. No one's telling you that you can't eat this, this, or this. It's you deciding, that's not going to bring me closer to my goals at this moment in time. So I'm going to say no, but that's my choice. I think recognizing that and taking someone through that thought process is going to help with addressing those behaviors as well.
Yeah, 100%. And you've touched on some really, really good points there, and something that I do with my clients as well. And so this kind of going to like the second point of this topic, this conversation, which is, the negative connotation towards the word dieting and emotional attachment to foods, right? The guilt of eating, you shouldn't feel bad about eating. And I think what you just said there, it's very, very interesting. Like, how when we are dieting, when we're trying to lose body fat, naturally our body is going to, physiologically, it's going to signaling us, to seek food essentially. So, which makes it harder, like, physiologically and psychologically, because when you can't have something, like you said, you tend to want it more. And then when you physiologically, your body is signaling you to seek food, that makes it even harder, right? So, and then especially, I think there's a huge environmental aspect that come into that as well. When you go into a work function, we have family gatherings, like especially if you are, say, someone working in the office every Friday, Saturday night, everyone's going out drinking and things like that. If you want to go and meet people, it's very hard to, it's very easily to be pressured into giving in, especially when you have all these other psychological, physiological things going on, and also environmental aspect as well. And like you say, this is one thing I talk to my clients about. You are doing the same thing, but it's a two different way of thinking. First thing is you think, okay, I shouldn't eat because I'm dieting and this particular food is bad. Or you can think, I choose to not eat this particular food because I prefer to use, other food sources to fill out my calorie intake, which will keep me fuller. Even though you're doing the same thing, but it's just two different way of thinking is what makes the difference, right? So one thing that I found that most people can relate to is, I guess, and what I really focus on is, trying to make them understand that look at food as a source of energy. And I like kind of like an energy currency, it's like budgeting your money. It's like, there's no good money or bad money, right? It just, let's say you have like you said, you have the choice to decide what food to eat. You have an unconditional permission to do that. Just like, when you have trying to budget your money, right? You have, let's say, $100 to spend a day. You can choose to buy a pair of shoes for $60. Sure, you can go do that, but that just means that you only have $40 to spend for the rest of the day for, if you want to buy food, water, and all the rest of it, right? Or you can choose to buy more, focusing on more the essential stuff that you can that you want to spend on. You can want to eat more food, you want to drink more, go out and have a few beers and things like that. You spend more money on those as opposed to buying a pair of shoes. Same as eating, right? When you are trying to lose body fat, so you chose to do that, so you have a target of calorie target, then you can choose, okay, sure, I can go have a full chocolate bar. It just means that I'll have to compensate somewhere else. Or I can choose not to have that chocolate bar and I'll have something that's a little bit more filling, so that can keep me satiated throughout the day. So that becomes a conscious decision as opposed to like, oh, I shouldn't eat this chocolate bar because it's bad for me. And that's usually kind of like the start of that, that cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes an investment will be worth it, but then you might want to save up for a little bit before you decide to invest in something.
Yeah.
So it's also knowing the possibilities and the options available to you and making a more rational rather than an emotional decision. So I think we should talk about the emotional aspect of eating as well, because emotional eating, I think, is viewed negatively, which I don't know if emotional eating is necessarily a bad thing all of the time. I think it's perfectly normal to, at the end of a stressful day, want to have a glass of wine or a square of chocolate at the end of the day, just because it is satisfying. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing on its own, as long as food isn't your only way to cope with these emotions like stress or anxiety or whatever. Because we do use food as a celebration. Someone's birthday, going to be a cake. That's just something we do culturally, and I don't think it's necessarily bad to associate emotions with food, as long as we know how to control them. And as I say, as long as they're not the only, food isn't the only way that you cope with certain emotions. So doing things in moderation. And as you said before, you're not a bad person for enjoying certain foods. Nowadays, foods are specifically engineered to taste as good as possible. They hit the bliss point because scientists have worked out the specific combinations of certain compounds that taste as good as possible and make us overeat on them. So knowing that you're not a bad person for enjoying chocolate because it's literally designed to taste as good as possible, you're just normal. And once you realize that and disassociate, your worth with your ability to control yourself around certain food, I think if you can think more rationally and take an objective stance, which helps actually to have a coach take you through this, because there's someone else who's like reassuring you, knowing that you're not crazy for enjoying these foods, and then figuring out how you can make it all work. I think that's like a huge step for people to overcome as well, is knowing that you're not a bad person for wanting some foods that you enjoy every now and then,
Yeah, and that's such a good point, that because food is like a huge part of, I guess, the society that we live in, a huge part of like our social life and things like that. When you want to catch up with friends, you go to a cafe. When you want to go out and have a celebrate your birthday, you book a restaurant. When you want to go on a date, you go have a nice restaurant, right? So if food is kind of like involved, I mean, unless you just completely disassociate yourself with the society and just keep yourself in the room. Like that's very, very unrealistic, right? And it's also why it's so important to have the understanding, like you said, and also develop this tool and understanding you have the power and control over eating and food as opposed to let it control you. And I think when it comes to it's I think physiologically, and I think you might be even better to speak on this as well. It's that, sometimes, for example, I think carbohydrate and sugar, there's sometimes people, when they are sad and things like that, they crave sweet things. And then like when you watch movies and, when you see someone going through a breakup, they're always eating ice creams and things like that to make them feel better. But I think apart from the emotional side, I think physiologically, it can definitely make a difference, like, like as far as lowering your cortisol and things like that, which is, like physiologically, it can have an impact as well. So I think that's another small point to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's
yeah,
just
sorry, you go.
just I think being aware of your choices and how they're going to impact your goals. Because I think when people do crave these certain foods, if you're telling yourself that you can't have it and then you overeat on it, the reason that you feel bad and guilty after is because it's not really what you want. Like, it can provide temporary satisfaction.
Yeah.
It alleviates, negative feelings whilst you're eating it. But then if you feel bad instantly right after, then that's not really helping you move forward long term. So remembering your long-term goal, having that in mind and prioritizing that, allows you to take a second to think before you eat these foods, and decide when it's worth it and when it's not. So as we say, you can eat these foods, and it's up to you to decide how urgent are your goals, how is eating XYZ going to affect the progress I'm making. Can I manage it so that it doesn't affect my progress at all, because I'm just having these things within a healthy diet in moderation? Then that's fine. Do I want to overeat because it's a social occasion and this is real life, and I've worked really hard for the past 10 weeks and maybe I'm happy to take a maintenance week? Understanding that and knowing how you can make it all work, that's going to lead to the best results long term as well. Because as we say, it's not a quick fix, it's not a race either. And you lose the fat the correct way and improve your mentality towards food, then those results are going to last you for the rest of your life. So it doesn't really matter how long it takes to get there, because once you're there, you're done,
Yeah, exactly. Because now you have the knowledge and tools that you can maintain that, right? And then when your body weight may go up and down throughout the years depending on what you're focusing on, but whenever you want to set a new goal, okay, I have this holiday coming up for the next 8 weeks, I'll just tighten up a little bit, then you can do that very quickly without sacrificing everything else, right? And then, like I said, when you associate that guilt after you have already eaten the foods and things like that, the logical thing, the common thing that we see a lot of people do is that fall right back into, all right, I'm just gonna start on Monday, I'll start eating clean and start exercising, and we hear that a lot, right? That's why the New Year resolution is such a thing, and like, or it's the 1st of January, okay, I'm gonna eat clean for the next 2 weeks and I'm gonna start exercising hard. But then 2 weeks in, when the motivation is gone, or the weekend's gone, you have all your problems and and your work life and everything that are still there, when you fall right back to the same mindset that you had previously, and it's like this thing don't last, and then you just constantly going through this cycle, right? And that's kind of like that binge and restrict cycle. When you do that, you feel guilty, then you fall right back into where you started in the first place, which is what caused you to partially binge in the first place. So
something that I like to teach is that there's a difference between a lapse and a total relapse. So a lapse may be that you're in a fat loss phase and you're trying to focus on making progress, but you come from this restricted background and you have a habit of binging and restricting. You may fall back into a bad habit every now and then. Like, nobody's perfect. You could do a few weeks really well managing your diet, and then you may have one overeating episode. Now that's a lapse. and you can move forward from there. The real damage comes when you do lapse and you think that you've blown it all, and then you totally relapse and go straight back to your old behaviors. I think knowing that it's okay to lapse, like that happens, right? People got bad habits. Change takes time. You're not going to go from binging and restricting to totally nailing your diet, 1 week later. It's going to be difficult to overcome those bad habits, and knowing that it's just a momentary pause on your progress and you're not going backwards, and then you can move forward again. I think the real damage is not from the foods that you've eaten. I think it's that internal, like, catastrophizing, how do you say? Catastrophizing, making things worse than what they are. When you think that you've done a lot more damage than what you really have physiologically, that's when you make things worse, because you relapse into old behaviors. So understanding the true impacts, like, maybe you had a bit of extra chocolate one night, or you had a couple of more drinks than what you really wanted. Knowing the real extent of the damage is probably not as much as you think. That will help you to overcome the momentary pause and keep moving forwards, rather than totally relapsing into old behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's one huge point that I try to make clients understand, is that the goal isn't trying to be perfect, because no one is perfect with their diet all the time. Like, even myself, like, obviously I'm here trying to help people, coaching people, teaching people and stuff. Like, I'm not perfect all the time. Like, I don't hit my macros to the T all the time. Sometimes we have things happening, but I understand that, okay, if I do, end up over consuming or whatever, I can just compensate the next day if I have a goal, or otherwise, if I'm just living life, then it's another day, right? Exactly. And like you said, we don't expect people to instantly make that shift, because it's going to take time, because it's kind of like a belief or something that's ingrained in you, and it's going to take some time to slowly work through that. So that's the part where you said, like, lapse, it's okay, but don't fall back into that relapse. And that's kind of tying to the next point, which is the knowledge and the information that we need to make the shift, right? One thing that I try to teach my clients, or I speak about this a lot, is that adhere to the fundamentals. If you have a goal as far as fat loss or muscle gain or whatever, and build a diet to fit your lifestyle, or find a way of eating to fit your lifestyle, not the other way around, which is what we see often, is people trying to force their lifestyle into fitting a particular diet approach, which doesn't last. And that's kind of when you have, like, all these problems that we sort of just spoke about, right? And I think it's also having an open mind and willingness to learn. The reality is, whatever you're trying to do hasn't worked, and it has kept people in that binge and restrict cycle. And that's the definition of insanity, right? To keep trying to do the same thing and expect a different result.
Yeah, definitely. And as we said at the beginning, like, physiological changes can happen quickly, and they can also happen without understanding how they occurred. But if you want to maintain those results long term, that's where the understanding is key, because you need to know how to manage your diet in a way that, as you say, suits your lifestyle, so that you can be flexible and adaptable, because things happen, life gets stressful, you've got to work, you need to know how to manage your diet in different circumstances. And if you haven't taken the time to learn the fundamentals, because you don't need to know lots, right? You don't need to go and get a degree in nutrition or training or whatever to understand how to live a healthy life, but it does require a certain basic foundational knowledge that nowadays, in this, like, modern day food environment, we can't expect to just know how to manage our weight without understanding the implications of certain foods and how to manage social life, all that kind of stuff. So having a coach who's going to take you through that process so that you can make these informed choices, that's the only way that you can navigate the modern day food environment, live a normal life, have a healthy mindset towards foods, and still get results that you're looking for.
Yeah, because I think what you said there is very, very important for a lot of people. Right? I mean, anyone can follow a diet when the motivation level is high for a short period of time, right? But when you're trying to make that mindset shift and also develop the knowledge and information required to sort of, so that way you can live for the rest of it, because eating is for life, right? But dieting is only ever moment, temporary. So have the tools and the knowledge necessary so you don't have to go through that diet cycle ever and ever again. Over and over again. And obviously that's sort of part of breaking that binge and restrict cycle, and which is ultimately what is going to allow you to set up that long-term success, which is not, like everything that we just touched up on. And, find a coach if you need some help, and I guess having that open mind and willingness to learn, and understand that it is going to take some time, not just to get the body that you want, but also have the enough knowledge and tools so that way you don't have to. Well, I mean, our goal ultimately is so that way you can move on from the coaching and then you can do this for the rest of your life, as opposed to constantly finding another coach, right? And that's kind of the next point that we want to talk about is, what do we want people to achieve ultimately, through Flex Success, or, through the informed eating, is, develop a healthier relationship with food and look at food as an energy source, develop knowledge and tools so eventually you don't have to get stuck in that, get trapped in that diet cycle, and you can make conscious decision on what food you want to eat, and you don't have to feel guilty. Have the control and the power over eating, and don't let it control you. Yeah.
That's something that I like to say as well. Like, you are in control of your diet. Your diet doesn't control you. So I think that's something that we want to achieve through our informed eating approach, is giving people the tools, the knowledge, the understanding that they need in order to make conscious choices, and understanding the implications of those choices so that you can make ones that are aligned with your goals, whether that's fat loss, muscle gain, or just managing your life. Like, once you hit where you want to be, there's nothing wrong with just wanting to stay there and enjoy yourself. So having an informed approach is the only way that you're going to know how to do all of that. And I think that's ultimately the end goal, is we just want people to feel confident, in control, and in a healthy place, so they have a good outlook on the foods that they're eating, but they're also healthy physically, psychologically, socially, emotionally. Like, all of this, it all comes into play. And as I said, the only way that you're going to know how to do that is if you do have that basic understanding, a healthy outlook on food and life kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a huge part is, we don't just give people the physical results, but we want to actually provide them, to making sure, like psychologically they are in a good place as far as, how they view food and how they view the, dieting. Because obviously, at the end of the day, when we go into the process, when you're trying to achieve a particular body composition goal, you have to adhere to, I guess, all the basics as far as calorie, macros, and things like that, which itself, there is some restriction there. But if we can find the freedom and the flexibility and ability to adapt within that, that's where you kind of find that, I guess, you have the power over everything. And once you can see through that, it's very easy, because then now you can do this for life, right? As opposed to just once, after New Year's, when you feel like you overate and things like that, and do it for the next 6 weeks, then you fall back to exactly where you were, and then go through the cycle of the next year. So so I think we touched upon a lot of key points, and I think we've gone a little bit longer than expected, but I mean, we knew that was going to be the case. So well, hope you guys enjoyed that, and hit us up if you have any questions, and then if you like this type of videos, this type of conversations, let us know, and we'll keep this up. So thanks, guys.
And that wraps up today's video. I hope you found it useful. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay in the loop with us. And if you want to check out the other cool things that we've got going on, then have a look at the description box. That's also where you'll find us on Facebook and Instagram. Cool. Thanks, guys. See you in the next one.